Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm going to go ahead and get started. I know there are lots of people still logging on, so hopefully they can all join us soon. So just to introduce myself, my name is Crystal Jacob. I am a proud supporter of the Lois Hole Women's Society, and I am also co-chair of our development committee. So for those of you who don't know, the Lois Hole Women's Society is a group of women in all ages and stages of life. We are passionate about raising excellence and awareness to women's health and women's health initiatives for the Lois Hole Hospital. And we host our Mind and Body Talks as an inclusive health series to engage and stay connected with our community. So for this evening, I would like to introduce to you one of our Lois Hole women's supporters as a showcase to show a bit why she supports our amazing society. So with that, I would like to welcome Laura Fitzgerald, if we can find her. Dun, dun, dun. And you know what? I think Laura may be just logging on as well. So I will continue and then hopefully we can get her to share when she comes on. So I'll just go over a little bit of housekeeping first for everyone. We are doing this in the Zoom webinar. So you don't have to worry about your cameras being on. For our amazing speakers tonight, their faces will show up in this. And with that said, we are honored to have the registered psychologist, Lauren Groves, with us this evening, and also registered dietitian, Kalin Herbach. They will both be joining us and doing a presentation together. We are hoping you will come away tonight from this presentation feeling educated and empowered and with some excellent resources that I know they will be able to provide for us all this evening. This is certainly a safe space. We welcome all questions. We will be hosting a Q&A period towards the end of the webinar. So for any questions you do have, just place them in the Q&A chat box and we will address all of those at the end of the seminar. We do have a live transcript on for this evening. It's not 100% accurate, but it really does help for inclusivity. And you are welcome to turn that on for yourself on the screen. Also, we will be uploading this series to YouTube to our channel tomorrow. And you can see the live transcript on there as well. So I think that's it for housekeeping. If you do have any questions as we're going, of course, just put those in the chat box for us. But before we wanted to get started, I wanted to send all of our thank yous to Alberta Blue Cross. They have been an amazing sponsor for this series for us. And now we will have Narissa, who's going to bring greetings from Blue Cross for us.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome. Hi everyone, I'm Narissa Kanji, Community Impact Manager at Alberta Blue Cross, and I want to welcome you all to Lois Hole's What the Health, Mind and Body Talks. At Alberta Blue Cross, community is the heart of everything that we do, and we strongly believe that by working with organizations like the Lois Hole Women's Society, we're able to really better the health and wellness of each Albertan. I'm so excited to hear from our speakers here tonight on this topic in this inclusive and open space. And thank you so much for coming and attending here with us tonight. Before we get started, I just want to do a land acknowledgement. Today and every day, we respectfully acknowledge that we are on the traditional lands referred to as Treaty 6 territory. We recognize that the City of Edmonton and us, the people here, are beneficiaries of this peace and friendship treaty. Treaty 6 encompasses the traditional territories of numerous Western Canada First Nations, such as the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, Nakota Sioux. We're taking this important moment here today to acknowledge all the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you so much for that. So now I have the honor of introducing our amazing speakers for this evening. We have Lauren and Kalin. So Lauren Groves is a registered psychologist and certified body trust provider. Lauren is the owner of Ignite Counseling and Wellness Services, a private counseling practice that offers feminist and social justice centered mental health care. She is passionate about holding space for others to come home to themselves and their bodies with compassion, trust, and care. She maintains a body positive, sex positive, poly, queer, and trans friendly safe space within her practice. So welcome, Lauren. And we also have her counterpart, Kalin. So Kalin Herbach is a weight inclusive registered dietitian, and she is the co-founder of Nourish Collective. Kalin's core values have been an essential guide for her, which has translated into an HAES aligned approach to care. And I will let her speak more on that this evening. She specializes in helping folks heal from eating disorders, disordered eating, and chronic dieting. Kalin is deeply passionate about helping individuals replace judgment and punishment with compassion and curiosity in their relationship with food and body. Kalin feels so grateful to do work and for meaningful relationships with her clients. And outside of work, you can find her at a local Edmonton coffee shop or in the River Valley. I'm not in the River Valley anymore with this cold, but that's amazing that you are. So welcome both, Kalin and Lauren. We are so happy to have you guys here this evening.
Thanks so much for having us. Am I good to share now? Yeah, awesome. All right, how is that looking? So good? All good? Excellent. Well, thank you all so much for being here. I really appreciate you spending your evening with us. Our topic this evening is going to be about health at every size and the work that we do in this area and what we've learned in our work, and our hope is to be able to share that with you this evening. So I think to start off, we'll talk about who we are, why we're here. Thank you so much for those wonderful introductions. I am Lauren. I'm a registered psychologist in Edmonton. I am also a certified body trust provider. The body trust certification program is a program through Be Nourished, which is an organization in Portland. It's a one-year training process where we learn all about these topics: radical acceptance, self-compassion, intuitive eating, health at every size, the social justice roots of fat acceptance, body acceptance, all these types of things. And I'm really, really grateful to be a part of that program because so much of my learning has come from that. I also want to share a little bit about how the perspective that I have on what we're talking about this evening comes definitely from my own place of privilege. And it is based on my perspective on things, and I do my best to acknowledge my bias and how that shows up in this work, but I also acknowledge the intersectionality and the complexity of the work that we're doing in terms of when it comes to body and eating and things like that. And so just acknowledge sort of my privileged position as a white settler doing this work. Pass it over to Kalin.
Thank you so much, Lauren. And just to echo to each and every one of you that I'm also so incredibly grateful to be here with all of you and have you be open to learning more about health at every size. So as Crystal said, my name is Kalin and I am a registered dietitian in Edmonton, and I have my own practice with a few other dietitians called the Nourish Collective. I've been in the space and doing this work for about 7 years, and I feel like my learning is ongoing, and I think that's just the nature of this space, and I'm so incredibly grateful to be a part of it. It's something that I learned about after going to school in my first year of work, I had a friend suggest a podcast, which we'll share at the end. It's Food Psych by Christy Harrison. And I think I had read an article about health at every size, and it's really just completely changed not only my practice, but my life. And it's a part of my values outside of work as well. And I also, similar to Lauren, really want to acknowledge the privileges that I hold and the fact that those privileges really impact the ease of which I move through the world and the perspective that I bring to this space. And like Lauren said, I'm always looking at my blind spots and trying to make sure that I'm not bringing any assumptions or biases into the work that I'm doing.
Awesome. Well, let's get started. If I can get to the next slide. There we go.
There we go.
There we go.
Thank you so much, Lauren. So we're really excited to dive into what we have planned with all of you today. So in order to set the framework, so to speak, to talk about health at every size, we've decided to break it up into talking about where we've been in the past. So as a part of that, we're going to talk about the history of dieting and also talk about the history of BMI or body mass index, which is something that's still widely used within our healthcare system today. We're going to talk about where we are and explore what diet culture is and some other parts of that, including weight stigma and fat phobia. And then we're going to talk about where we are going and where we hope to continue to go and have more people see a different way of thinking about things, which will include us diving into health at every size and talking about what that entails. And then we're going to move into a space for all of you to be able to ask questions and to talk about things in general. And then we'll also share some resources that you can start with and kind of a place to go from here.
So starting off then with where we've been, I'm going to take on this section. History of BMI. BMI is something that it shows up a lot, specifically in healthcare. It has become kind of the standard of, I'm not sure exactly how to describe it, but it's really just kind of become the standard thing that everybody knows. It's sort of like, okay, this is what your BMI is, whether or not you fall within a specific group. There's also a lot of association here between what is healthy and what is unhealthy in terms of BMI. I thought it'd be helpful to speak a little bit to what the history of BMI actually was. So it was created by a Belgian man as a part of his attempt to gain an understanding of the average man. For him, average meant ideal. It wasn't, I think we have a modern understanding of average as just being that kind of average, mediocre, okay. For him, he was really obsessed with finding this idea of the ideal person, sort of distilling all of the characteristics of a population into what is the average man or the ideal of that time. It's really interesting because that was his perspective on that, which would be like, okay, who's the most average? Whereas now I think our beauty standards are a lot about who are the outliers in a lot of ways, right? What are the unattainable qualities of people? It's important to note here as well that he was really looking at white Western Europeans to gather his data as well. So it was very, very specific in terms of what type of person he was looking at to determine his average. This was actually widely used to justify racism and eugenics during this time, just because there was this idea of who was ideal. So there's huge racist histories of BMI sort of embedded in this as well. I think an important thing to note here is that BMI was intended to be used on populations. It was a statistical tool to look at the population as a whole. It was never intended to be used on an individual basis. I want to also mention exactly what BMI is because a lot of people don't know. It's very arbitrary. Basically, when he was creating it, he had to fudge the numbers a little bit to try to find an equation that really worked for what he was looking for to try to get this statistic. So he determined that they were going to divide the weight in kilograms by your height in meters squared. It's very absurd and very meaningless mathematically. It doesn't really mean anything. It was just sort of what he came up with to be able to come up with this average. Because it's only looking at things like height and weight, it doesn't take into consideration anything else beyond that, which tells us nothing about health. The cutoffs between the underweight, normal, overweight categories are arbitrary. And it's also interesting to note that they've changed over time as well. I remember reading, there was an article from I think it was 98 when they had changed the cutoffs, and they said, oh, suddenly like millions of Americans have become like obese overnight, because even though they haven't changed weight, because they changed the cutoffs, even though that was arbitrary. This index that they had created in terms of, again, what is now known as BMI, was adopted in the early 20th century by US life insurance companies that were trying to figure out, how much do we charge people? How do we figure out who's healthy and who's not healthy? Well, we'll just use this and see how it goes. And then the idea became more popular in the 50s and 60s when physicians started to use it as a convenient way to measure ideal weight. But again, because the actual ways of trying to determine health are a lot more complex than simply taking somebody's height and weight and doing a quick mathematical equation with it. So one thing that I want to say about this, and I think that it was just sort of a quote that I saw from one of the articles I have listed below. It was from the Psychology Today article. It really stood out to me to really show what the purpose of this was when it was created. The man who created it said, if the average man were completely determined, we might consider him as the type of perfection, and anything or everything differing from his proportion or condition would constitute deformity or disease or monstrosity. That really stood out to me, because I was thinking, okay, this is really the mindset that they were going in when they were creating this. Was this is what's normal, this is what's average, this is what is ideal. Anything outside of this is deformity, disease, monstrosity. So I think it's important to recognize that history. There's also really two really great articles on it that I had linked at the bottom. I know you can't click on the links, but if you search for sort of the titles there, you'll be able to find them. Moving on to some other interesting history. This is from Dietetically Speaking. It's the history of fad diets. I think it's interesting as well to look at, again, the history of where we've been. I think we think of fad dieting as something that is fairly new because it has really exploded over the last, I don't know, maybe 50, 60 years. There's been a lot more money to be made in this area, but this is definitely not something new. Humans have been trying to find ways to obtain health and to change their bodies since the history of the beginning of the world. I wanted to point out some particularly ridiculous ones. The 175 BC cabbage and urine diet. I found it interesting that we have this obsession with cabbage that's never really gone away. Like the cabbage soup diet came up again. Like there have been several diets that have been surrounding cabbage, and I don't know why we've really zeroed in on this as the miracle vegetable. But yeah, his whole thing was cabbage was amazing. It was going to cure everything. You should not only, I read something about him saying you should like bathe your babies in the urine of people who have eaten a lot of cabbage. Like it was weird. We move into the late 1800s. We have the arsenic diet. I mean, looking back on that now, like absurd. The 1898, the Fletcher chew and spit diet, he had very specific rules on how many times you needed to chew specific foods. And I think I remember reading something about a shallot requiring over 700, like 702 like different times to chew it, and that's the ideal. Moving into the early 1900s with the tapeworm diet, people intentionally ingesting tapeworms with the idea that it would eat all of their food, it would slim them down, and that they would be able to safely pass them. That didn't always happen, very dangerous. And then, wait, sorry, my little thing's in the way. I can't really see it. There we go. Reach for a Lucky instead of a sweet. That was our cigarette campaign in the late 1920s. Smoke cigarettes instead of eating food. Grapefruit diet came up in the 30s. We'll see the grapefruit diet come back up again later. There's the cabbage soup diet. 1970s, Sleeping Beauty diet. People would intentionally put themselves into comas for a couple of days so that they wouldn't ingest food while in those comas, and take the time to, or basically with the idea that they would wake up weighing less than they went to sleep. Yeah, so this is really not new, is I guess the part that I really want to kind of hammer home here, is that we have been trying things for the history of the species, and if these things worked, we wouldn't have to keep reinventing it. I would like to think that one day we would look back on some of the dieting fads of the here and now with the same kind of feeling as we do looking back on some of these things, to be like, okay, this is clearly absurd, this clearly doesn't really make any sense, why do we try it? Right. And I think that's what we'll get into as well, in terms of why are diets so popular? Why do we keep doing this to ourselves? I also found the link that I put at the bottom. There's a really interesting website that had a whole bunch of different eras in human history, and it looks at the data of what the food recommendations were at that time. So a lot of these diets, there's more information about them, as well as just how our recommendations for what is healthy in terms of food radically changes over time. So I just thought that was sort of an interesting way to maybe start this off and look at, okay, where have we come from? Nothing that we're talking about is new. This is something that this has been building for quite a while. Yeah. So with that said, and so what has that all led up to?
Thank you so much for going through that, Lauren. I feel like it's incredibly interesting. And like you said, we really just want to drive home that we can look back and it seems ridiculous. And really, there's no difference between all of those different diets and what's happening now, right? So we're going to move into talking more about where we are now. And something really critical for us to talk about is the system and the idea of diet culture. It's honestly really the water we swim in, the water that we drink. It's something that's really, really hard to grasp because it's everywhere. It's infiltrated every conversation, every relationship, and also in our healthcare system. And so it's really important to define it. And in the best way possible, our hope is that once you see it, you can't unsee it, right? And it changes the way that we interact with others and hopefully the way that we care for ourselves as well, which we'll be talking more about with moving into talking about health at every size. So diet culture is a system of beliefs that worships thinness and equates it not only to health, but also to moral virtue. It promotes weight loss as a means of attaining higher status. So essentially, what diet culture does is creates this difference in level of privilege, really, in the way that you move through the world. And we can see it in so many ways. Like once we start seeing it, there are so many examples around us, and it's really harmful. Diet culture also demonizes certain ways of eating while elevating others. So really the good and bad, healthy, unhealthy rhetoric, which we'll talk about a little bit more. And this is where most of the harm, or the substantial amount of harm, is done, in that diet culture oppresses people who don't match up with that supposed picture of health, right? Diet culture thrives on perfectionism, which is an interesting connection to Lauren talking about BMI and the person who developed BMI, and really focuses on that binary of healthy, unhealthy, good, bad. And we often not only in moralization of food, we connect that also to ourselves. You know, often you will hear someone say, I was good because XYZ, or I was bad because XYZ. So it goes back to that moralization when food and the decisions that you make around food is not, there's no moral value in that. And lastly, diet culture is in a symbiotic relationship with capitalism. And so I think we've all been led to believe that there's a lot of kind of general discussions around dieting and weight loss, that it's for your health and it's for your well-being, when ultimately diet culture and the diet industry is incredibly profitable. And that's why it exists, right? Not because diet culture cares about our well-being, because it's something that's profitable and continues to withhold these systems or the ladder that exists in our society.
Absolutely. One of the part of the articles I was reading was about Lord Byron's Vinegar diet. And it made a comment about how, like, if Lord Byron had existed in current days, he would absolutely have a book. And like sort of the explosion of dieting, even though it has existed throughout history, the explosion of fad dieting, especially recently, very much has that connection as well with capitalism, because there is huge money to be made. There's so many different platforms where you can sort of access your audience now and profit off of it. Yeah. So this is what diet culture doesn't tell you, is that it is a $72 billion industry. If dieting worked, they would all be out of business, plain and simple, right? If they're selling a product that doesn't work and then blaming the consumer when it fails. And that's always been so fascinating to me, is that it's so ingrained in us that it's our own failure of willpower. It's our own failure to not perfectly adhere to the plan that's the problem, and not the actual product itself. Nobody looks towards the product and says, hey, maybe this isn't sustainable. Hey, maybe this doesn't actually work for all bodies, or any bodies in some circumstances. Why are we blaming ourselves for this? It's not, intentional weight loss is not sustainable for most people, plain and simple. This is where perfectionism, I think, starts to play in again, where it's this idea that you have to perfectly adhere to the rules, and if you don't, then it's your fault when it doesn't work. That level of perfectionism can harm us psychologically, our emotional health. It can make us feel like failures. It can damage our relationships with food. It can damage relationships with body. It can damage our relationships with other people. It can also cause physical harm. There's so much that harm that is done from the impact of diet culture. And the bottom line is that smaller does not mean healthier. And yet this is something that we just keep striving towards with the hope that, oh, well, next time we do it, it's going to work. Next time we do it, it's going to be different. When we start again on Monday, that's when it's really going to start and it's really going to work for us. So yeah, that's sort of the underlying other side of it. There's so many promises that are brought forward that says, these are all the things you're going to gain access to if you simply buy our product, if you simply follow the rules.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Something to add to that, just to really drive it home, is that if let's say it was a medication, if a medication had the failure rate that dieting does, and again, not because of you, because of the system and the fact that that's what makes it profitable, we would not continue to try it again and again and again, right? That medication would not be available on the market. And yet dieting just continues to be repackaged in different ways, as you saw by what Lauren went through, and presented like it's different, but really it isn't. And the other thing that I will add before we talk about the costs of dieting, which is really restriction, is that we deeply understand when we're talking about this, that you thought you were doing the quote unquote right thing, and that often what's beneath pursuing intentional weight loss in whatever form is, it's not about vanity. It's about being told that you're going to belong, you're going to be accepted, you're going to be loved in a different way, right? As long as you follow these rules and you just do this perfectly, you're going to have all of these great things in your life. And it's not your fault that you fell into that, especially when it's continually around you and being perpetuated at all times. So when we're talking about this, just know that we have so much compassion for you, that you've done the best that you could. And of course, you fell into that way of thinking because it's everywhere, right?
Well, and I'll also say that we're not exempt from that.
No.
Right? We're not sitting here being like, oh, we've never done dieting or we've never experienced this. Like, we also live in this world and experience this, and the amount of, I mean, I'll speak for myself personally, but the amount of work that I've done personally to undo all of this stuff has taken years and years and years, and it's not done yet, right? It's never quite done because we're still being exposed to these things, right? It's not over. Diet culture is not over. It's still continuously perpetuated all around us. So doesn't mean that it's not worth it, or that it's not trying to discourage people from doing the work because it's hard, but just sort of also recognizing the reality of it. It's hard, and we absolutely have compassion for where you're at, wherever you're at this point in your life.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Lauren. So moving in to really talk about why this matters so much. And I think that's kind of the narrative that's been perpetuated with diets, is that there's no cost associated with it, that you might as well try it because if it doesn't work, it just doesn't work. But that is definitely not the case. It comes with immense harm, whether we're able to recognize it in the moment or not. So this is definitely not an exhaustive list, but just some things that really highlights how much of an impact it has. So first and foremost, preoccupation with food. And what's so ironic about this is that diet culture says that it's because you're obsessed, or because you have a quote unquote addictive personality, or those kinds of things, when really, when our bodies are not getting enough nourishment that we need to live, our body is resilient and is going to guide us towards food. And so when we tell ourselves that we can't have something, our brain is going to think about it more. There's been kind of different, unrelated, but still applicable studies of, don't think about a pink elephant. What do you want to think about? A pink elephant, right? It's the same in our relationship with food. Our bodies want to keep us alive. And if something is off limits, we want it even more. And that's the case for every human. It's not just you, right? Like Lauren said earlier, feeling like a failure. And that's what keeps you going back and going in that cycle over and over again. It couldn't possibly be the diet or the product. It's you that failed. And of course, then you go back and try the next thing and have the hope that maybe this time it will be different. I think there's this idea that the way that we quote unquote fix, which is problematic language because you do not need to be fixed, but the way that we talk about body image is that if we quote unquote fix what we dislike, that's magically going to heal our body image and we're going to feel better about ourselves. But it's never enough. With diet culture and dieting, it's never enough. And the way that we work on feeling more neutral or accepting of ourselves isn't by changing ourselves, right? And Lauren has a lot of knowledge and experience from her body trust training in that area. Also, this is something that hits very close to home in the work that I do, that dieting is often a gateway for disordered behaviors, including eating disorders. And that's a spectrum in my mind of disordered eating and eating disorders. And so many behaviors around food and how we treat our bodies are disordered, and yet they're normalized and perpetuated in our society. And the pandemic there was already an increase before the pandemic in disruption in our relationship with food, but the pandemic has not helped, and it's increasing, and nobody's talking about that, right? And we need to be talking about it more. Also, a cost of dieting is weight cycling. So having an up and down in a person's weight has more risk, a lot more risk associated than maintaining the same weight throughout your life, no matter where that falls. So the up and down is really hard on our systems, and our bodies do have a place that they like to be. And it's not that that doesn't change over time, because bodies change, that's just what they do. But the up and down causes a lot of damage to our well-being. And then, of course, missed life experiences and opportunities because of dieting and needing to fall into that idea of being perfect and following the plan. So this could look a few different ways. It could be that narrative of, I'll do it when, right? I will go on the trip. I will go to that event when I'm smaller. So that part of it, and also that following, as Lauren explained, following the rules, so to speak, doesn't lead to living a full and joyful life. And so that's going to lead to missing out on things.
I also want to mention before I continue that we're bringing up a lot of stuff, and it's a lot of tough stuff, and it's a lot of really personal stuff for a lot of people. And if at any time you need to take a break or step away, like, it's recorded, it'll be available at another time, like just sort of a note to take care of yourself if any of this is bringing anything up for you and you need to step away or take some time. That's totally okay and understandable. So the sort of culmination of all of this has led to a very, what we're calling the weight normative approach. And what this does is it prioritizes weight as the main determinant of health. That's the thing that's sort of the first thing that's looked at, especially within the health system. Sort of, okay, is this person healthy or not? What are we going to do? Well, we're going to check their BMI. We're going to look at them with our eyes, and we're going to make a determination before we do any tests or anything else that's going to let us know that this person is healthy, unhealthy. Again, that dichotomy, that binary. It assumes that weight and disease are related in a linear fashion, which means as weight increases, disease increases. As weight decreases, disease decreases, which we know is not the case. It puts a personal responsibility for healthy weight and healthy lifestyle choices onto the individual versus looking at all of the different systemic issues. And we'll talk about all of those in a second, but look at all of the other complexities that go into what determines an individual person's health. What ends up happening then is, because there's such a strong association between weight and health, weight loss or weight management then becomes the primary treatment for a wide variety of health problems. Like, oh, you broke your ankle, try losing weight. You have strep throat, try losing weight. You might think that these are absurd examples, but actual things that I've heard from people in some of the Facebook groups that I'm a part of, I've heard people say these before. Well, they'll go to the doctor and they'll say, hey, like, I have strep throat a lot. Like, maybe you could just help me out with this. And they're like, okay, but while you're here, let's talk about how if you lost weight, things would be better for you. As opposed to actually addressing what the concern is. And it creates inequity in care that's dependent on body size. I like to say, like, we don't actually know what the health disparity would look like across the wide spectrum of human size if everybody had equal access to healthcare. We don't know how much of a variable weight stigma or this weight normative approach, how much of that is playing into some of the health disparities that we see across, again, the wide spectrum of human sizes that humans come in. So yeah, at the bottom line, the weight normative approach creates inequity. Oh, I'll just say before you go into this that the next two slides were created by Michelle Kennedy, who is a registered psychologist and my colleague at Ignite. And thank you to Michelle for this information, because it's just so well put.
Absolutely. Thanks to Michelle for sure. So just to really drive it home as well, I think we made this clear, but that weight normative approach very much is a reflection of our current healthcare system in a broad stroke, right? There might be providers that are practicing a more weight inclusive approach, but kind of in general, that's what we're seeing, and that's the care that people are receiving, and there's inequities in those in the care that people are getting. So I think as we move into talking about weight stigma, it's interesting because there are conversations in our healthcare system about anti-fat bias and weight stigma, and yet we are not yet seeing the change in how care is being approached. And I know Lauren and I are both holding a lot of hope that that change will happen over time, right? And every conversation, every approach matters, and it's an opportunity to change that. So again, thanks to Michelle for this. Weight stigma is the belief that fat people are inherently less healthy, less active, and less happy than people who are not fat. Whew. That is a lot to take in, and you can see that it is filled with so much harm and assumptions, right? And often that's probably a really clear example of this in our healthcare system, is that a person who identifies as fat or lives in a larger body goes to the doctor and they're not asked anything about how they care for themselves, what their relationship with food is like, what relationship with movement is like, do they have access to proper housing, like just none of those questions are asked. And yet, like Lauren said, there is automatically a conversation about how are we going to get your weight down, or what are we going to do about your weight? Any chance to slip that in without asking any questions about them and how they're caring for themselves and how they're doing, right? Weight stigma is also the belief that those who are fat would experience less physical and mental health issues if they were not fat, often at the expense of fat people who are denied mental and physical health care until they are able to shrink their bodies. So this is exactly what Lauren was saying, that we really don't know what the differences would be in, and again, health is not, that's such a subjective term that we're going to talk about, but when we look at the research around health as it stands today, we know very clearly that weight stigma is affecting health outcomes for people who are stigmatized when they're trying to receive care. And not only does that lead to people no longer accessing care for fear of ridicule, being judged, this being the conversation that's being had, we know weight stigma in itself leads to negative health outcomes. And it's not just mental and emotional, it's also physical health outcomes. And so until we have a medical system and a world where weight stigma doesn't exist and all people in all bodies have access to the same level of care, we're not going to know what the impact is. And it's so sad, and it's such a disservice because we don't talk about this. You know, even in my own education, it was framed that, you know, these groups of people have higher risk of disease, but it wasn't talked about why. And we didn't talk about weight stigma, and it's such a necessary and integral part of the conversation.
Yeah, and I know that I could continue to talk about this forever. But I'm also mindful of the time because I want to make sure that we get through everything that we have here. So I'm going to try to resist the urge to go a little bit deeper with this stuff, just to be able to get through the rest of what we have to offer you for this evening. So weight stigma, fat phobia go hand in hand. Weight stigma is what we just talked about, sort of that belief system around fat bad, thin good. Fat phobia is more sort of that scaffolding around it. It's the structure that maintains the system. There's this wonderful quote. It says, in addition to close-up instances of fat phobia that we may have internalized about our bodies, are microaggressions from friends, the idea that being fat is wrong, shameful, disgusting, and something to be feared is communicated all around us in the media, in fashion, by doctors, in health policy, and by the diet industry. And that's a quote from Sonali, who has a wonderful Instagram, I believe. I believe that's where. Let's see if I can find it at the end, because I think that there's a wonderful Instagram page that Sonali runs. Yeah, it really is that sort of like, it's not just specific instances. It's not specific like, oh, like Michelle had said here, I went to the gym and somebody fat shamed me or body shamed me. It is that, like, it's the constant pressure, it's the all around, it's the unspoken and sometimes very, very spoken overt messaging that we receive on a constant basis. Sorry, I just had to look at the chat. Yeah. The fat equals bad is so ingrained into us from a very young age as well. So with all of what we're up against right now, where are we going? Where would we like to see society shift towards? I want to say that with the caveat that people have been doing this work for a long time. Sort of what we know is the modern kind of fat acceptance movement, kind of what's morphed into the health at every size approach, which is health at every size is a trademark of the Association for Size Diversity and Health, which is an amazing organization that's doing wonderful things. But a lot of the social justice activism work around fat acceptance actually started in the late 60s, and really does have like deep roots in social justice and feminism. There's a lot of history there. It's definitely not something new, even if it's something that is sort of new to us in terms of coming into the modern or the mainstream focus. Yeah, it's definitely not new. Been around for a while.
Okay, thank you so much, Lauren. So as a starting place to where we are going, and thanks to all of the people who have done the work before us for this to be possible, something that's really important to talk about is this idea of health, and just how in our society still there's such a set definition of what health is. And as the Association for Size Diversity and Health has a wonderful definition that we wanted to read to you. And it's definitely, like everything else, going to take some time probably to digest and to reflect on, but it essentially takes what we know and what we've learned as health and really breaks it down in a beautiful way. So ASDA affirms a holistic definition of health, which cannot be characterized as simply the absence of physical or mental illness, limitation, or disease. Rather, health exists on a continuum that varies with time and circumstance for each individual. Health should be conceived as a resource or capacity available to all, regardless of health condition or ability level, and not as an outcome or individual obligation. And health status should never be used to judge, oppress, or determine the value of an individual. So I would say the things that really stand out is that it cannot be characterized as simply the absence of physical or mental illness, limitation, or disease, that it's a continuum that varies with time and circumstance, that it is deserved to be available to all, and that it's not a moral imperative nor an individual obligation. So like Lauren said earlier, we make it an individual's responsibility where there's this whole system that contributes to a person's ability to engage in health promoting behaviors and so many other factors that are not within our control that affect our health.
And I think, especially as we have these conversations about health, something that's important to emphasize as well is that you don't owe health to anybody. It's not, again, it is not a moral imperative that you be healthy. It is not your life's work. Like health means to you what it means to you. And health also exists on a spectrum. So just as a note, as we talk about health, there is no singular definition of health, although we like the one that Asda has come up with because it is so inclusive of all of these things. But health is individual, health is personal, and also there's no reason that you have to pursue health. You don't owe it to anybody. So what is a weight inclusive approach as an alternative to a weight normative approach? It assumes that everybody is capable of engaging in health promoting behaviors, again, if you so choose, right? Health promoting behaviors is my preferred language to use around this, because we can all do things that improve our health, and whether or not that's our physical health, that's our mental health, that's our interpersonal or social health. There's so many different aspects of our well-being that we can engage in, again, if that's something that we want to. A big part of this is that weight is not a behavior. So much of what we're taught is that, like, oh, we have to do these things and these things equal weight loss. And we have this idea that we can do weight loss in some way. If we just do weight loss hard enough, we'll get the results that we want. But weight is not a behavior. Weight loss is not a behavior. It's just not. And yet we as we continue to treat it as it is, that's where we run into some issues. So the weight inclusive approach recognizes weight's not a behavior. It challenges the belief that a certain BMI reflects a particular set of health practices or moral characters. I mean, I'd go as far to say that the weight inclusive approach just completely takes BMI out of the equation altogether, because it's garbage science based on nothing. So it doesn't even factor into it. There are so many different aspects of health that we could, and well-being that we could be looking at, that we could actually be focusing on, that we actually do have some control over, that are better indicators of our overall health and well-being than continuously looking at weight and BMI. It works to ensure that the same level of care is provided to all bodies, so that if somebody goes in for an issue, regardless of their size, they're treated the same. It recognizes the complex nature and interconnecting factors that contribute to health and well-being overall, that weight is not sort of the singular determinant of health, even though that's sometimes what we really get wrapped up in.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lauren. And that takes us into talking about the social determinants of health. And I think this is something that has been, alongside everything that we've been talking about, has been completely misconstrued. And so this is a really wonderful, it's pretty easy to remember, that just at the bottom, the determinants of health.org website. It's a really interactive website that you can go on to, and it expands on all these different areas. But essentially, the main point that we want to make here is that you can see that individual behaviors only make up 36% of what impacts a person's health. And within individual behavior lies things like how we nourish ourselves, how we move our bodies. But that's not all. Those are just two small factors in a bunch of other things related to individual behavior. So that could be whether you smoke, that could be whether you wear your seatbelt, that could be your ability to socialize and engage with others. So we've taken this pie chart and we've made weight, nutrition, and exercise take up this entire chart. And we just really want to frame and acknowledge that we can only 36% of what impacts our health is our individual behavior. There's environment to consider, our access and ability to receive equitable medical care, genetics and biology, and social circumstances. So again, it's not that nourishment and movement don't matter at all. It's just that the way that we've talked about those things is that they're the only thing that matters. And that's just not true and not accurate. So just to expand on this, we'd really encourage you to visit the website because it really highlights things in a beautiful way.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I don't know if it necessarily goes into this, but I was thinking about the impact of, like you're talking about before, like the impact of weight stigma and fat phobia and oppression and marginalization and sort of minority stress related things also have, like the stress of oppression and marginalization also has a huge impact on our overall health and well-being.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's talk about the thing that we're all here to talk about, which is what exactly is health at every size. I do want to say that health at every size is not the only approach. That when we talk about anti-diets approaches to things, we talk about alternative paradigms. There's lots of ways of approaching this. I just like this because it sort of touches on all the key components of what we're looking for in terms of like equitable care and compassion towards ourselves and our bodies, creating a nurturing, loving relationship with ourselves. It's kind of the whole package. It's got a lot going on. So the first piece, these are the main components. The first piece is weight inclusivity, which is to accept and respect the inherent diversity of body shapes and sizes, and then reject the idealizing or pathologizing of specific weights. There's this really great video called Poodle Science that is on YouTube. It talks about how we completely never question that dogs come in all different sizes and shapes and breeds, and we're just like, oh yeah, those are just different types of dogs. And yet when it comes to humans, it's like, oh no, there's like one specific type of human and this is the way that we're all supposed to look. It's a good video, you should check it out. So the weight inclusivity piece, accepting the inherent diversity of body shapes and sizes. Health enhancement, supporting health policies that improve and equalize access to information and services, and personal practices that improve human well-being, including attention to individual physical, economic, social, spiritual, emotional, and other needs. So identifying all of the different aspects of health and ways that we can improve well-being and enhance equal access to this type of care, information, and services. Respectful care, acknowledging our biases, working to end weight discrimination, weight stigma, weight bias, sort of acknowledging how all of these pieces coincide and create or impact health outcomes for people. Providing information and services from an understanding that socioeconomic status, race, gender, sexual orientation, age, and other identities impact weight stigma and support environments that address these inequities. So there is a intersection of all of those things as well, recognizing that health is complex, that well-being is complex, and inequity shows up in a lot of different intersecting ways. Eating for well-being, it promotes flexible, individualized eating based on hunger, satiety, nutritional needs, and pleasure, rather than anything that's externally regulated in terms of like an eating plan focused on weight control. So this is, again, where kind of like the rejection of that perfectionism comes up, to say that there isn't one way to be an eater there's so many different ways. Normal eating can be so many different things, and it can include eating for pleasure. It can include looking forward to eating something and enjoying yourself in the process. That can be a part of our eating for well-being. It's flexible, it's individual. There is no prescriptive one-size-fits-all meal plan within this perspective on things. And the life-enhancing movement. Movement's not something that we've really talked about up until this point, but the HAES approach to things focuses on promoting flexible, I almost read the eating one again, physical activities that allow people of all sizes, abilities, and interests to engage in enjoyable movement to the degree that they choose. So some may also call this joyful movement, connecting with things that make you feel good about you, as opposed to viewing exercise as punishment or something that you have to do to compensate for eating, right? Can it exist independent of our eating, because it's a way of connecting with ourselves and our bodies, a way of marveling at all of the things that our bodies can do for us, but also doing it in a way that, again, identifies different sizes, abilities, and interests, right? Not everybody is going to move in the same way, and that's okay. Anything you'd like to add to that?
Thank you so much, Lauren. Something that I will quickly add, as Lauren and I were preparing for this opportunity, just connected to life-enhancing movement. I did not know this, but just to talk about, again, how misconstrued our ideas are, is that this idea of 10,000 steps a day literally is not based in any kind of research. And where that came from is there was a Japanese company that had made a pedometer, and 10,000 was included in their logo, and that just blew up. And when there was a study done, and when we look at it, kind of the benefits of more steps leveled out at, I think it was around 7,000 steps a day.
About 7,000, yeah.
Yeah, so go ahead.
Sorry, no, I actually had the thing in front of me, so I was just going to read through this, because it was a study that was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, looking into the steps, being like, where did this come from? Why are we using 10,000 steps as a guideline? And they said, she said, based on conversations she's had with Japanese researchers, she believes that the name was chosen for the product because the character for 10,000 in Japanese sort of looks like a man walking. That's it. And I made a note under this with an exclamation mark that said, everything is made up.
Yeah.
Yeah, everything's made up. All right. Thank you for reminding me about that, because I think that was, so interesting to include.
Definitely. Thanks, Lauren.
So now we've talked about all of this. Now what? How do you actually apply this into your life? What are some things that you can take away from this to move forward, to start to make some shifts in your life, if that's something that you want to do? Yeah.
Absolutely. So first and foremost, I know both Lauren and I cannot say enough that there is so much room for self-compassion and gentleness in doing this work. I think there's this overall belief in our society that in order to be motivated or to do things in our lives, that means being really hard on ourselves and tough love being present. And we cannot say enough that shame is not a motivator for treating yourself well and caring for yourself in a loving way. And so there's so much space to bring self-compassion into your relationship with food and with your body and along this journey. And I know that idea of self-compassion can feel so fluffy. And yet when we look at how we treat others, we wouldn't even question it, right? And it's just making space to apply that to our relationship with ourselves. Another thing to consider is that this is absolutely a process. And just like any other relationship, whether it be with your partner or with a friend or a family member, that's an ongoing relationship. We don't all of a sudden just say, okay, I'm done working on this relationship, unless it's one that's not healthy or not serving you, right? But relationships are ongoing. And so that's going to be the same as the relationship that we have with ourselves and with our own bodies. This is something that Lauren has added from her body trust training, recognizing that we can't go back, even if we don't yet know the way forward. And this connects to something that I often say to my clients, is that you may not know exactly what things are going to look like, but what you know with so much certainty is that other way of thinking hasn't helped you and hasn't served you. And you deserve to trust yourself in that, right?
Mm-hmm. I think it's important to validate here, like that feeling of being lost, especially when, and actually at various points along this journey, the feeling of like, okay, but if not this, then what? Because this is so pervasive. This is everything that I've ever known and everything that I've ever been taught, and all of the things that everybody around me keeps saying. So if not this, then what? And sometimes this work can be very isolating. And that's why it's so lovely for me to be able to connect with people like Kalin, who's doing this work, and to be able to share like a professional community. And I think maybe I'll skip to this last part here, to say that like connecting with community and providers that support your journey is so valuable in this, because it can really be very isolating. But I apologize for jumping ahead.
Not at all, Lauren. Thank you so much. And just to leave you with this last point as well, that consider doing things for and with your body versus to and against it. And that's something that all of these systems of oppression do, is lead you to not trust your body, and to be in this really disruptive relationship with it, and just making space to be with your body and to do things for and with it, as opposed to and against it.
Mm-hmm. And I do want to acknowledge that so much of this comes from my body trust training. A lot of these are taken directly from there's this, if you go to the website that's linked on linked below there, there's a diagram of a tree that shows sort of all of the phases of moving towards a body trust process. And there's a lot of these are directly taken from that. We have to slow down and acknowledge that this is hard, and grief is a huge part of it, especially grief for lost time, and grief for like you were saying before, Kalin, the events and activities that you missed out on, that you put off until you got to this point where you were at a weight where you felt comfortable doing it. We delay our happiness so frequently because we feel like we're going to be in a better space to do something in the future. It feels like that's not something that's accessible to us now. And when we take a step back and sort of really start to take in all of how much we've been lied to about the restrictions on things that we're supposed to be able to do, or the things we're not supposed to be able to do, there's going to be a huge amount of grief associated with that there has been a lot of time lost hating ourselves, not having this relationship with ourselves, not having a trusting relationship with ourselves. We've lost a lot, and that's a hugely emotional process that's tremendously full of grief. Yeah. So we wanted to leave you with a question to ponder before we go into our question and answer, because we're going to be available for some questions. So maybe let's just take even just a minute. I'll put the question up on the screen. We'll both mute and be quiet, and at the end of the minute, I'll bring us back. But something to just reflect on in light of everything that we've been talking about today. And the question is, and this is also, I'll say, taken from my body trust stuff. If you woke up tomorrow and lived in a weight inclusive, body positive world where you would never have to worry about weight bias again, what would you want to do to take care of yourself? What would you do more of? What would you do less of? And I'll mute myself and we'll come back in a minute. All right. Thanks so much for doing that with us. I encourage you to continue to think about this. And in what ways might you be able to implement some of those things that you would do if you woke up in a weight inclusive, body positive world? In what ways might you be able to implement some of those things now? Even if it's just some version of that. How might we take care of ourselves if we already had that loving and trusting relationship with ourselves? So now we are available for questions. I have been, just as a note, I have been looking at the comments the whole time. I've just been trying not to get too distracted.
Yes, me too.
Absolutely. I'm just wondering if I am coming up for anyone.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can't.
I'm not coming up for myself. So
Okay.
I'm not sure what was going on there. So hi everyone who I haven't met. My name is Rhiannon Adams. I am a supporter of the Louisville Hospital Women's Society. I'm also co-chair of the development committee with Crystal, who you met earlier. I'm going to be facilitating the question and answer portion, and obviously want to thank Lauren and Kalin for their amazing and extremely eye-opening presentation on a lot of the history and what we can do to sort of think about how we move forward. So if anyone has, I know there's been lots of comments in the chat, and they're fantastic. And I know, Lauren, you said you've been looking at it. So if anyone has specific questions, there is a Q&A box thing beside participants. You can also put stuff in the chat. I'll look in both of those. And that's the preferred way to put a question forward. And then I will read it out. And then we'll have Lauren and or Kalin respond. And while we're maybe waiting for a question, I thought I would two things. I found that this is really interesting, and it's something that I've been thinking about since a while. But I think one of the most interesting things was someone at some point said to me, if you are stepping on a scale and the way you feel the rest of the day is related to how you've, whatever numbers on the scale, that's not a healthy place to be. And so really just try and maybe not even do that, but that shouldn't make you feel any particular way about yourself or about how you look or your self-esteem or anything like that. So that's a number. Ignore that. I feel like that's also arbitrary. Now we've talked about
absolutely
the things that are arbitrary.
There's actually very, very few reasons as to why we would actually need to know our exact weight. A lot of people are surprised to learn that you don't have to be weighed when you go to the doctor. You can actually refuse, unless they're dosing medication, unless they're giving you anesthesia, unless I think some pregnancy stuff, they might need to know weight just to make sure things are good. But there are specific circumstances where being weighed makes sense, but you don't always have to do it. You can actually ask them, is there a specific reason why you need my weight in order to be able to give me care today? Or you can also, if they do it, you can also just turn around and not look at it. That's another thing, is sometimes people will stand backwards and not have to look at it, just so that they can know if they really want to know, but you don't have to know.
Yeah, and that makes sense.
But I do see some questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So I will read the first question. There's also a comment in the chat. So I'll do these two questions and then I'll go to the chat. And I think that was an interesting comment. I've read part of it. So the first question is, do you have any advice around finding providers and working with them in a way that supports your health goals beyond just that weight gain or weight loss factor? Sorry.
You can take this one.
That's a really, really wonderful question. So something that I've been thinking is maybe there's a way for us to send out some of the links and resources that we've shared today with all of you. And I think something that we could include in that is there are definitely provider lists of weight inclusive and HAES-aligned providers that we could include. I think something to be very transparent about is that depending on the type of care provider, they may not, we are working on this changing, but they may not directly identify as being HAES-aligned or maybe be at that point. But I really want to give a lot of hope that all that you need is someone who listens and who is compassionate and is willing to listen to your story, and that you really, really deserve to advocate for yourself. And I think a lot of the time it's definitely not intentional, but in our weight normative healthcare system, it's about the provider when really it's about you and feeling like your needs are being met. So although there are many practitioners in different areas out there that identify as being HAES-aligned, and we can provide that resource, you also have if you feel you have the capacity or the ability to advocate for yourself, I think there's potential in existing relationships sometimes. And also, I'm sure that I can speak for both Lauren and myself, that that's a part of our role, is helping our clients find other care providers that they need on their team, and help our clients advocate for that, because sometimes it's hard to do that on your own, right?
Well, and I think there's also, there is a health at every size, like providers listing. I think that if you've taken, or like there's like a little pledge that you can take on the website, and you can be added as a provider on there. I'm not even 100% sure I'm still on there. I think I was at some point, but I think they changed their website. The Body Trust provider list also has some people, but I will be honest, I think I'm the only psychologist in Alberta that's on that list. There are some dietitians though. Oh no, there is another psychologist in Alberta that's on that list, but they can be few and far between. Asking for recommendations from other people, like if you do find a community of people that can also provide suggestions, sometimes it really is hit or miss. Like I'd like to say like, oh, you just do this and this is where you're going to find the treasure trove of people that are going to support you in this way, but it's really hard. And even as professionals, we have a really hard time trying to find referrals for people and make good suggestions, and being able to vouch for people that we know are going to treat people with care and equity and respect. So just more validate that it's tough. Keep at it. There are people out there that do exist. It just sometimes takes a little bit of time to find.
And if we can get the links and the resources, obviously we'll connect with you afterwards and grab those, and then we'll be able to send them out. I was going to mention this at the end, but we do send out a survey. I don't know if we'll have the links in time to send out with the survey for this talk, but we can follow up, I'm sure, with some of those resources. Okay, so we do have a bunch of things coming in. So someone said they want to be a good advocate for health at every size, but it's a tricky topic, as I think were made clear tonight. What is a good way to approach the situation? Is there any good or helpful way to respond to a friend who starts a conversation about going on a diet? self-shame or even making comments like, oh, I need to lose 20 pounds, which I'm sure I've said.
Yeah, sometimes I'll answer them, but say it in a way of like reframing of like, oh, it's I'm like, if somebody's talking about like exercising or something like that, I'll be like, okay, is that something that feels good for you or that you're enjoying or that you like, or is the food that you're eating, does it feel good? Do you feel nourished? Like sometimes I'll just sort of pick apart those pieces and say like, okay, I can reinforce that part of it without doing the normal like, oh my goodness, no, you look great, or like, oh, it's so great that you're doing that. We do this thing where like somebody says I need to lose weight and then we're supposed to also say that in turn. I just stopped doing that, has really shifted things significantly. I don't initiate the conversation. Sometimes I'll just stare blankly at them and not respond at all. It's very awkward, but if you can handle awkward silences, it actually usually shuts down the conversation if you just refuse to participate in it. If it's somebody that you have a trusting relationship with, you can bring it up to be like, actually, you know what? It's interesting. I just learned something, as opposed like I learned something new about dieting, as opposed to it coming across as being like kind of lecturing or like, oh, you shouldn't do that. It's sort of just like, oh, you know what? I found out something interesting that when we restrict, we often eat more as a result. It's like, or that nourishing ourselves, actually, anything you want to say. There's no one right way to deal with that. It is really tricky. I'll again acknowledge that and validate that. It takes practice. And it's uncomfortable. There's no real comfortable way to address that because there is a social norm that's being violated when you don't praise somebody's weight loss attempts.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'll just add one very quick thing that to what Lauren has said, that I think what this brings up is your own boundaries too. And as much as I hear you that you want to be an advocate, and that is amazing, something that I always remind myself of is, are they reachable? Are they teachable? Are they ready? Because you can expend so much energy trying to get someone to hear you, and if they're not ready, they're not ready. And that means that you get to set a boundary though of whether those are things that you want to talk about in your relationship, right? Because they could be harmful to you for those things to be brought up. So
yeah, thank you. So going to the chat box, there was someone who said, I feel healthier when I'm thin. I have more energy. Do you think this is a state of mind because of weight stigma and not physical? And then is age related to weight gain? So two sort of questions in there.
I can tackle the first one. You can tackle the second one. Do you want to do that? Okay. It's hard to say because often, how do I want to phrase this? There's not always an association between doing certain behaviors and weight loss being guaranteed as a result. But sometimes I think when we do get into that mindset of like taking care of ourselves, that often kind of is like a dieting mindset, but we might do other stuff in addition to that, like sleep better or drink more water or move more or do things that, again, the weight loss itself is not the behavior, but often the things that we do in the pursuit of intentional weight loss can sometimes have the side effect of making us feel better, because those are things that would have made us feel better regardless of whether or not there was weight loss associated with it. So I think that in those situations, identifying like, okay, what is the actual activity that I did? When you're saying like I felt healthier when I'm thin, did you feel healthier when you were moving your body more? Did you feel healthier when you were drinking more water? Did you feel healthier when you were sleeping more consistently or had more of a routine in your life? Did you feel healthier because you felt better about yourself and you generally had more confidence? And there's other things that are associated with that could potentially create that, and it's not necessarily just the weight loss in and of itself that is the reason that you might be feeling better. Also, I want to say weight stigma. Like often we actually feel better when we're thin because we get treated better, and we get a lot of praise, and people are like, you're amazing and you look amazing, and like, get rewarded with a ton of stuff in terms of like social capital and things like that. Like there's a lot of other reasons why we might be feeling better when we're smaller as well.
Absolutely. That's awesome, Lauren. And to answer the second part of your question, it's very complex and I want to be mindful of time, but I think the short answer is yes, bodies change. And for folks who identify as a woman and maybe have had a menstrual cycle, when that process is changing at a later stage of life, the reason that there tends to be weight gain in the middle is a very protective factor because of changes in hormones. And of course, that's not something that's talked about. It's always framed in this really negative way because, again, diet culture in our society has perpetuated the idea that weight gain is bad, right? So I think just in general, it's knowing that bodies change and that's what they do. And that's a very natural process in many different ways, right? Not just weight.
Yeah, and it can be hugely protective for illnesses that often occur in older, as we age as well.
Absolutely.
If you consider the amount of weight loss that typically occurs with significant illness, your body's sort of preparing and you have a bit of a buffer, you tend to fare better. There's a lot of like biological reasons for that as well.
So that participant just said thank you. And I am also mindful of time. So what I think I'm going to do is I am going to sort of do our little wrap up, but anyone who is welcome, who wants to stay on, is welcome to stay on. I know that there is a question down here about as an RD, are there training courses or training that can be taken as a certified provider? So maybe, you know, if you have those resources or links, we can add that to what we've done there. So I'm going to do this little thing at the end, and then we can continue on for those who are sticking around. And if not, if you have to go to bed, get ready for bed, I don't know if you're an early to bed these days, that's also fine too. So I want to obviously thank Kalin and Lauren so much for their amazing presentation and their knowledge and sharing that with us tonight. We all definitely learned a lot. I learned a lot. We are wanting to also thank all of you here for your continued support of the Women's Society. If you aren't an active member or aren't a member of the Women's Society, please consider joining. There's more information about how to become a monthly supporter or a member of the Women's Society at lhhwomensociety.com. I am hoping someone will throw that into the chat. And if not, again, it's lhhwomensociety.com. We also want to do say a very special thank you to all of those who did donate. Obviously, when you registered, there was a question if you'd like to make a donation, and we really appreciate everyone who did that. I get all the thank you. So also thank you, Alberta Blue Cross, for your continued support of this series and for sponsoring What the Health. As I mentioned before, we'll be sending out a short survey. We'd love to get your feedback on this presentation and ideas for future presentations. We do have our next lecture will be coming up in January. So currently it is scheduled for January the 20th from 7 to 8:30. And please save the date. We will be sending out more information on that, including the topic a little later. So thank you everyone for attending. Oh yes. There's also the YouTube link, I'll do that reminder, will be posted either tomorrow or Monday. And so you can come back and look at the presentation again, share it with family and friends, anyone you think may need it. I know there was someone making, or in the comment in the chat box talking about how to maybe speak to their parents about these types of issues. Maybe just send them the link to the YouTube and then that may be a starting point, I'm not sure. Thank you very much. And that sort of wraps up the formal part. But if Kalin and Lauren are okay, I'm going to keep going with these questions. So let me just scroll back through all of the lovely comments. And so, okay, so I'm just looking at the timing here. So how would you go about breaking a relationship with your scale, etc., when you already like essentially logically understand why that understanding of why that number or how your clothes fit or don't fit doesn't really ascribe value to who you are as a person. So you can apply that logic and knowledge to other people beside yourself, but are having a hard time with yourself. So what thoughts or suggestions can you give this person?
I think right off the top of my head, I think that we're so often looking for concrete ways to show progress. Like we're taught that it needs to be, progress needs to be tangible. It needs to be like a number on a scale or a measurement of a body part or a number of calories or things like that. Like there needs to be a tangible aspect to it to be able to show growth and to show that we're being productive and we're being healthy and we're doing the things we're supposed to be doing. So I think it's really hard when you know all of those things and you already sort of are doing this work. There's still that sort of little nagging part of your brain that says, but like, you're not doing enough, or you're not doing it right, or like you need to measure this, you need to quantify your progress in some way. And I think sometimes that's where that pull can come from, to keep being like, well, I need to at least know what the number is and whether or not that number is changing. Again, because we live in the world, and the world hasn't changed, even though you have. There still is that urge to fall back into that previous way of being, that I think it just takes time to get out of, to recognize like, what do you actually want when you're going back to the scale? What is it that, what are you trying to accomplish by that? What feeling do you get by doing that? And to see if there's another way to potentially meet that need.
Absolutely. Thanks, Lauren. I think just very quickly, what I'll add to what Lauren has shared is that eventually I think it comes a time that it's sitting in the discomfort of creating distance, right? Like physically creating distance from that behavior, and it's going to feel uncomfortable, right?
Mm-hmm. You almost feel lost without it.
Yes.
Like you don't have that security or that safety net of the thing that you've always done. Now what? What does it mean to just be with ourselves? We're very uncomfortable when we just have to exist. We're not preoccupied by other stuff. We're distracted by other things.
Yeah. So, and speaking about the scale, and I know this is jumping in there, I've also talked to people who would say, stepping on a scale makes them not gain as much weight as they would otherwise, which I think is interesting. And I don't know, I feel like that's maybe not the best way to go about it, but for them it works. And maybe it's that if it works for you, then that's okay. I don't know. I've jumped in here, but what are the thoughts?
I'm really glad that you brought that up. I think I'm curious what you have to say, Lauren, but I think what comes to mind for me, and these are not my words, this is a paraphrase quote, that the weight or the size that's meant for our bodies is the one that exists effortlessly without any kind of compensation, restriction, manipulation, and constantly being exposed to that number reinforces that it is connected to our worthiness. And I think it also changes our behaviors, and there could be a level of restraint that's happening, right? And again, the size that's meant for our bodies is the one that exists effortlessly.
I think it's very similar to like obsessive food journaling in a lot of ways as well, right? Sort of that, like when people say like, well, when I write down every single thing that I eat less because I have that awareness of it. But it also often comes to the point of being obsessive and being really restrictive. And like humans are generally pretty good at losing weight initially when starting something that's like very like extreme. Like there tends to, not for everybody, but there tends to be some like really quick instant results of something, and sometimes it's water weight, sometimes we don't really know what's happening. But when you make a huge shift in your behavior, or in doing something, if you make a huge shift in your consumption of something, if you're restricting, your body responds to that. And that's sometimes where that initial kind of like, oh my goodness, it's working, comes in, even though that's not sustainable in the long run, because those initial behaviors are not sustainable. They're not nourishing you, they're not caring for you in any way, they're not providing you with what you need. And often it is that really sort of extreme sort of results that people get in those first couple of weeks that makes people think that it's going to work. And that's what kind of like hooks people into continuing to do it, even though that's not sustainable, because that's wildly outside of anything that we would normally do to take care of ourselves, or what's sustainable in the long run.
Yeah,
so
thank you. Yeah. So, and someone put in here, stepping on a scale shames you into not eating, and I'll feel like that's
also that, yeah,
correct. That was well done. Okay, so I'm gonna go back up here. So someone said there's a girl on TikTok who makes videos of what her body looks like before she eats versus what it looks like after she eats. And this person says, I have an eating disorder and I've suffered from body dysmorphia. Because of her video, it helped me to change my thinking. So Clara, so this TikTok person who does the TikTok, talks about how food nourishes the body, and that helps a lot, because now I'm not as scared to eat like I was before. My question is, how can we practice self-compassion with our bodies when all social media does is tell us if you aren't skinny, you aren't not good enough?
First suggestion is to follow different people. We can do some editing of the people that we follow on social media to try to follow more diversity in terms of, I mean, any kind of diversity is great to be exposed to on a regular basis, but body diversity in particular, if you are able to find, curating social media feeds to be able to see the types of bodies that you want to be exposed to on a regular basis, the types of bodies that make you feel good about yourself, versus the ones that are constantly like reinforcing some of those I can't think of the word right now. I think my brain is slowly shutting down because it's getting late. but yeah, absolutely. Cutting it out, curating, and following people who nourish you.
Yes, and I will just quickly add, I don't think we can do justice to your question of talking about self-compassion because it's so nuanced, but I would say that Kristen Neff's website is a good place to start, of just breaking down what self-compassion is and resources around it. And I will just lastly say that it is a practice and it's something that can be learned. So don't give up on it. It's not your fault that you don't know how to be compassionate towards yourself. And it's a practice that you can learn, right? It just takes time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I repeat it to myself really regularly. You can be nice to yourself today about this if there's something super stressful. Okay, I think that there've been a lot of really great comments. I just think this one question probably will wrap it up. But it is, how do we, so I alluded to it before. So how do we navigate parents who are at a bad place in their own health journey and sort of project that negativity outwards onto those around them without making them feel shut down or hurt? So for example, this person's father frames a ton of their advice as, I'm just worried for your health.
I think first and foremost, we just want to say that we're with you and have so much compassion for you in navigating personal relationships. And I'll probably need your help on this one, Lauren. I feel like as well, it's hard to do this question justice. But I think coming back to that, you don't have to just tolerate hearing that. And I think the idea of boundaries comes up, right? And we often feel like, I think there's this sense that setting a boundary is going to disconnect us, when really boundaries help us stay in loving connection with the people around us. And so, especially depending on what that relationship has looked like, it might be incredibly difficult. So just remembering that there's, like Lauren has alluded to, there's many different ways to set a boundary. It doesn't have to be this big, story that you're telling. It could be not engaging in that conversation, or saying, I really enjoy spending time with you, and I would really prefer that we don't talk about these things. So just really, really encouraging you that you are allowed and deserve to have boundaries around what you talk about and who you talk about things with. And it's not, again, coming back to that idea of, are they reachable? Are they teachable? Are they ready? They may not be at a place, and that's sad for sure, but they may not be at a place of willingness to change their thinking, and that's okay, right? That doesn't mean that you can't set boundaries for yourself.
And I think right off the top of my head too, I was thinking, like, when people say that they're concerned for your health, like maybe even reinforcing that, like, you would like them to be concerned about all aspects of your health. Like, if it really is truly about health, then could they also ask you questions about, like, other things, like in terms of when they're expressing concern. You could also set boundaries around things that you're comfortable talking about and things that you're not comfortable talking about. You could make statements as like, okay, I understand that you're concerned for my health, but that's something that I'm managing, or like my health is between me and my doctor, or like it's not something you need to be involved in. Like, I appreciate your concern, but your concern is also harmful, or like your concern is also hurting me, because it's making me feel as though you have these judgments about me. Or like sometimes even just explaining that even though you understand where he's coming from in terms of trying to be loving and caring and providing you with the support, it is still hurtful, and maybe there's a different way that he could be expressing that to you, that would be better for both of you. Like, maybe if you could get at the core of what he actually means, or what he actually wants when he's communicating those things to you, you could be more clear on the communication between the two of you, as opposed to it always being misinterpreted.
Yeah, I think that's amazing, because he's clearly, I think, equating weight and health, right? And saying, it's not just about that, making that disconnect. So I think that we're just going to wrap it up. There's been a lot of thank you messages. If we can extract them, I think we'll try to do that. I have also copied the one question about the training courses. So I have that specifically. I'll pass that along. We can hopefully include links to that. Thank you again, everyone, for attending. Thank you so much to Lauren and Kalin for coming and speaking to us, taking the time out to make that presentation, and taking the time tonight to speak with us. So thank you so much. Everyone, have a great night.
You as well. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Bye.